Mr. Ambassador, allow me to thank you on behalf of myself and ITSS Verona for accepting our invitation. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Ambassador, would you kindly introduce yourself and give us a brief biography?
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to the Embassy of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I was born and raised in Afghanistan, 1981. Like most other Afghans, we fled the country. And after 3 years staying in Pakistan, we went to the United States. I finished high school in the US, and then I went to University of California, San Diego, where I attained 2 bachelor degrees, one in sociology and also one in history. And thereafter I finished my master's at San Diego State University in political science, and specialization was on political culture. And then I taught for many years, and then in 2003, based on the invitation of the government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We went through 1 year of rigorous training, and also I was delighted to serve Dr. Abdullah, who used to be our former foreign minister at that time. And then I did some consultation, and then I became the head of the Americas division. It was a political division. We had 5 political divisions. And then after serving for 5.5 years, became the Afghan ambassador to Doha, Qatar. I was there till 2013, and upon my return to Kabul, President Karzai asked me to again assume the 5th political division's duties, which was again Americas division, Australia, New Zealand. And after 7 years, I came to Italy here. Our mandate here for most of ambassadors are between 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years.
I submitted my credentials to President Mattarella on March 4th. So I've been here for almost 10 months. Yes.
Thank you. Your Excellency, in the last 2 decades, many achievements have been achieved. Many successes had happened within the social sphere of Afghanistan. We've seen the development of a certain civic virtue of hope when women were treated equally, when people were more free to express themselves, to be more free as Afghan people. How much do you think these achievements can survive the upcoming government and the upcoming form of chaos that is going on within the country?
Well, I think Afghanistan of today is not the Afghanistan of 20 years ago. And I'm going to tell you why that is. Number one, we have a short legacy of democracy in Afghanistan. In 1960s, between 1960s and 1970s, we had a period of almost 10 years where we had a constitutional monarchy in Afghanistan under the former king of Afghanistan, King Mohammed Zahir Shah, who's also the father of the nation. And within that 10 years, I think that golden era of democracy, which most have coined it, through oral culture, has been transmitted to the current generation in Afghanistan. So that's one. Number two, what is very, very important is also the youth, through oral culture and also through their own research and reading, have realized that Afghanistan has, experienced different type of regimes. Before the independence, we had the emirs that ruled the country, and then in 1919, when we had our independence, of course, then we had a monarchy, which lasted till King Mohammed Zahir Shah. Then the formation of the republic by President Dawood, and then thereafter we had the communist regimes, with a sort of a command economy. Pursuant to that, we had the Mujahideen took over Afghanistan, and they ruled the country for a short period of time. And then we had the Taliban. In 2001, of course, with the under the United Nations various resolutions, international community came to Afghanistan, and that actually opened up space, political space, a breeding space for the Afghan youth. As you know, Afghanistan has had tremendous achievement and in area of education, and we had close to 2,400 civil society organizations listed at Ministry of Justice, and most of them were very functional. 11 independent TV stations, more than 150 printed news media outlets, so forth and so on. So these achievements are granted because of democratization, liberalization, and to some extent consumerism and urbanization. Things have changed dramatically in Afghanistan. The current generation, as you have seen in the past few weeks, are not going to submit and become obedient to a regime that has come to power by force. The people of Afghanistan as a whole, and in particular the youth, are ready to continue, their protests and demonstrations. And of course, at the end of the day, I think this is going to lead to national uprisings. We see signs around the country, So all in all, I think resistance will continue in different forms. May it be, I hope it's not going to be violent. Violence would not manifest from such movements, but at the end of the day, the people of Afghanistan, the citizens of our country, have the right to stand up for their what is called their right, their natural right, their legal rights in Afghanistan.
Surely. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned this very interesting term about consumerism in Afghanistan. And the fact is, consumerism is a secondary cause once we have stabilized infrastructures. In the means of infrastructures, what are the levels that we have achieved in the past 2 decades in Afghanistan?
Well, in terms of infrastructure, I have to tell you that a lot has been done. Infrastructure building when the United States started, after nation building, and then they changed their foreign policy and they focused themselves on the issue of state building. A lot has been achieved. I can tell you close to $30 billion have been invested in private sector. $3 billion only in the telecom service industry. 80% of Afghanistan have access to telecom service. That in itself is a great achievement. Our circular road that connected the entire Afghanistan was consolidated and finished in 2009. So because at the end of the day, we were looking forward to start exploration of underground resources, because that needs infrastructure as well. Beyond that, if you look at the GDP, there has been 8% growth on a yearly basis. That's a grand
amazing
achievement. Export in 2021 was close, actually more than $1 billion. All in all, I think these are achievements that cannot be negated in terms of infrastructure. And more so, I think what was very important for the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, still is very important, is the issue of regional connectivity. I had an interview many months ago on TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. It is a pipeline, gas line that comes from Turkmenistan, it goes through Afghanistan, and then through Pakistan, and ultimately will go to India. That in itself is a project that was, the 3rd phase of that project was finished, and we were supposed to start the 4th phase of construction. Casa 1000, Lapis Lazuli corridor, all of these are infrastructure projects.
Mr. Ambassador, certain countries in the past weeks have expressed their interest in acknowledging a government made by the Taliban. And they have been giving this narrative that is actually the choice of the Afghan people, that they want Taliban to rule over them. What would you say to your Western audience, to people living in Europe, in the United States? Is that true? And for what reason those certain countries are trying to continue to support the establishment of an emirate by the Taliban?
Well, I strongly believe that the international community as a whole, and also in particular some of our neighbors, natural neighbors and near neighbors, they've realized that in order for peace, prosperity and security to prevail in the region, there has to be a secure and peaceful Afghanistan. Based on that, I have to tell you, any foreign policy that's predicated on duplicity, on ill will, on strategic depth, as they call it, expansionism, exploitation, or espousing radical Islam, that foreign policy sooner or later will fail, and that will also become a tragedy for some nation states in the region, and they could face institutional meltdown sooner or later. Terrorism does not recognize any border. Terrorism does not recognize any creed. Terrorism does not recognize any nation or any state. The reason that we've been working so diligently here in this embassy and other missions abroad is that we do not believe in any form of theocracy in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been a very moderate society. We've been able to balance tradition with modernization in our country. History shows us whenever you've had this imbalance between tradition and modernization, that's when chaos starts. The interpretation of Islam by the Taliban stems from a radical viewpoint of Sharia, and that has become very intolerable for the people of Afghanistan. The demonstrations, the protests, the national resistance in the past week are indicative of the fact that the people of Afghanistan do not support the Taliban regime. Now, there are certain elements in various countries, certain circles, that try to speak on behalf of the people of Afghanistan, speak on behalf of the legitimate Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I have to be very clear and concise. We have a living constitution. We have a state. We have that very notion of what democratic rights are. The people of Afghanistan, they feel as citizens of that country, power emanates from the constitution. Does not come by taking power by force. Legitimacy also in terms of recognition, the Taliban do not have internal legitimacy based on the fact that they took power by force. Number two, they don't have performance legitimacy. They cannot provide services for the people of Afghanistan. They talk about security over and over again. As you know better, security is multifaceted. There's one thing, it's called physical security, but there's psychological, financial, so forth and so on. I think the path that we're on, if some of our natural neighbors and near neighbors will continue to support the Taliban the way they are, and basically lobby on their behalf, as we've seen at the United Nations General Assembly in the past few days, I think at the end of the day, not only they will be able to represent the people of Afghanistan, I think their foreign policy and their notion of what is right and what is wrong for Afghanistan will become isolated, and it will become unimportant, I think, for the international community. As we've seen in the recent days, we know, who are the supporters of democracy and who are against, those very important elements that basically represent the core of society.
Core of the society. Mr. Ambassador, about the concept of collective security that you mentioned, it means certain people in the public administration, in the public office, in the government that can guarantee those facts, that can guarantee that collective security for the country. We've been seeing that certain names are appearing in a list of the new public administration presented by the Taliban as the new public representatives in Afghanistan. And honestly, most of these people do not even have the basic requirements to be hired by public administration. What is it that they are exactly trying to achieve? What is their message?
Well, you know, the so-called Taliban Emirates caretaker government, where out of 33 ministers, 17 are actually on the UN sanction list and also the United States blacklist, as indicative of the fact that they strongly believe that they can lead and they can manage the government by some of these terrorist leaders. As far as, you know, in the past 3 or 4 days, they came up with second tier, third tier administrative posts were announced. And as you can see, for example, the University of Afghanistan is a prime example, where they brought a gentleman that had no experience whatsoever. And as a result, there was a collective effort by all professors. There's a professors' union in Afghanistan that basically echoed the sentiment that we will not accept a person who was a terrorist and who doesn't have the higher education required to basically lead the university. What do they want to gain from this? I think it's that issue of they want to, it's a matter of trust, because they don't believe in a system of check and balance. They believe in a system that is based on clientele system. So, and trust basically emanates from that. Anyone that is outside, you know, their group is not acceptable to the Taliban. In the past few days, we've seen a prime example. We had a very efficacious acting minister of health who clearly showed you know, a sense of cooperation with the Taliban when they took over Kabul. 3 days ago, they asked him to depart. A man that has, you know, worked for many, many years, not only in the Ministry of Health, but also as a doctor, a very successful doctor. So as you can see, it's just that concept of either you are part of the Taliban or you're not going to be you're not going to be able to work for the Taliban. So I think the Taliban regime is only for the Taliban. The Taliban regime is not for the populace in Afghanistan.
Thank you. And we see that even though they try to also, like before, continue their purifying approaches to have a pure society, we see that the society of Afghanistan, people of Afghanistan today, are refusing that and they are resisting that. But still, there are these news by the supporters of these extremists, by the supporters, if you allow me, of these terrorists, who say that they have evolved, they have changed. What would be your answer to them? Have they really changed? Because we are seeing from evidence on the ground that this is not the case.
Well, as far as purification, sanctification is concerned, let me be very clear. We, as a Muslim society, we have a covenant, which is the Holy Quran. Okay, that Holy Covenant for us is the Holy Quran, and it is the holy sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And of course, at the end of the day, what is very important in Afghan culture is the issue of shura, or consultation, councils. So we were a purified society, and we will continue to be a purified society. We do not need a terrorist organization to come to Afghanistan and dominate Afghanistan by force and then say we are here to purify society. So that is basically dead wrong. Of course, on the question on the notion that you alluded, and I do not recall, what did you say the second part of your question was?
People that are saying that these people have evolved and they have changed now.
No, not at all. I think you're not going to be able to change that ideology. That ideology has not changed. If you look at 1990s till today, nothing has changed. Recently, in 2 provinces of Afghanistan, Kunar being one, they basically released a declaration that henceforth people are not going to be able to shave their beards.
Yes.
Western style is not acceptable as it comes to hairstyle and beard style. This is just an example, a very simple example that the Taliban are not ready to change.
Okay.
They have been very keen in terms of having a different path when it comes to communication. Their strategic communication has not been really that successful. But what we have is we have social media on one hand, and of course we have media engagement in Afghanistan. Journalists going, a lot of them, especially
Quite
Italian journalists, yes, they're very active. So that in itself indicative of the fact that they have not changed. Recently, they killed 4 individuals and they hanged them on cranes to showcase their power and might and so-called their justice in Herat. So without the due process. So at the end of the day, I don't think people of Afghanistan, I don't think they believe that they've changed, because words are not going to be sufficient. Deeds are actually considered to be very important, in terms of our judgment.
Your Excellency, regarding the extraction of US troops from Afghanistan, would you say that it was rushed? And what, in your opinion, what would have been a better scenario?
I think first and foremost, what the Biden administration should have done is they should have actually scrutinized the Doha Agreement, because in the Doha Agreement there were a lot of contradictions. They could have basically amended this agreement or come up with a new agreement with the Taliban. Number 2, the withdrawal announcement, the unilateral withdrawal announcement should have occurred on a responsible and gradual manner. We should have had some sort of peace dividend, in Doha for us to proceed with the withdrawal. We had nothing. The so-called republic, which represented the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, our negotiation teams were there for months and months. And unfortunately, what the Taliban were doing, they were just buying time, because they were emboldened by the former administration, Trump's administration. Thereafter, when the Biden administration took over, they basically accepted the agreement itself in its entirety. And also, even if we look at that agreement was not respected and observed by the Taliban, if you look at it. And they were never reprimanded. And we had a strategic agreement with the United States, a binding agreement. And that binding agreement was actually basically superseded by an agreement with a terrorist organization, the Doha Agreement itself. So that and all, I think that could have, I think they could have taken a different, a plan could have been very different in terms of gradual withdrawal in Afghanistan, based on peace dividends.
See, Mr. Ambassador, what can be done to support the resistance of the people of Afghanistan? And what can be done to support the movement by the Honorable Ahmad Massoud?
This morning, the government, this morning, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, they came out with a declaration. And that declaration is very concise and clear. We have transmitted that to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, and to also our international organizations stationed here in missions here in Rome as well. And that declaration basically indicates that, first of all, it talks about that there is a unity amongst all leaders of Afghanistan, prominent members of Afghan society, including the ones that are inside Afghanistan, outside Afghanistan, leaders of diaspora, Afghan diaspora. That and all, basically, it's a declaration that we stand united to basically support and protect the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's constitution, its values, as enshrined in the constitution. Also in that declaration, I think it's item number 6, they have indicated that in due course of time, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan will be announced. Of course, national resistance is a very important arm of this government. In order for us to have access to territory and space, at the end of the day, we need to support resistance, the national resistance and other pockets of resistance throughout Afghanistan. So I strongly believe that the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan itself, the state itself, which is now has a caretaker, Mr. Amrullah Saleh, the former first vice president, along with Mr. Masood, who is the head of this national resistance, sort of play this sort of a complementarity role in this. At the end of the day, when the government will be announced in exile, either inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan, if it's going to be inside Afghanistan, it needs more territory, more access to physical space. And I think that national resistance will provide that amenity for that government.
Mr. Ambassador, what can other countries, particularly European countries and American countries, what can they do to give Afghan people a help in order to avoid the reestablishment of a theocracy in Afghanistan?
I think we have employing pressure and power is very important. So we have to use our approach should be to use soft power and hard power. Soft power is very clear. No recognition for the Taliban. Also, continue to support the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan's missions abroad. Because at the end of the day, we basically are the ones who stand up for the people of Afghanistan's right outside Afghanistan. And we support, basically we are always engaged with the media, with political circles in our stationed countries to continue to fight for the rights of women, girls, and minorities in Afghanistan. And to really give an overview of what is really going on in Afghanistan. That's very important, soft power. And of course, employ media pressures, cultural engagement is very important. Now, of course, the hard power issue is an issue that I think it's already in place. Sanctions. As far as the central bank reserve is concerned, Afghanistan Central Bank, we should go ahead and continue to leave that as is. Of course, there are some countries that try to speak on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan for basically releasing those funds. But at the end of the day, they have to understand it's not their property. It is the national property of the people of Afghanistan. Now, I strongly believe that when it comes to Taliban, you have to exert pressure. And also you have to create what I called a safe physical space inside Afghanistan, preferably in the capital city of Kabul. We need to have a monitoring mechanism. The international community under the UN, in US, and also regional countries should have a monitoring mechanism in place in Afghanistan. With that, they will be able to see how the humanitarian assistance is being conducted, so there would not be any impeding constraints imposed by the Taliban. Evacuation process needs to be consolidated, because we still have, Afghan nationals that have worked, with the foreigners, or there are still some foreigners in Afghanistan. So that evacuation process has to continue, it has to be completed. Third facet is human rights protection. We need to have that monitoring mechanisms to be able to go around Afghanistan freely to see if there is human rights violation and report it. And fourth, what is very, very important is of course what I call transition, constitution, and electoral process. When they say an inclusive government, what do you mean by inclusive government? The international community needs to define an inclusive interim government or inclusive permanent government. I don't believe in a permanent government. I believe there has to be an inclusive, temporary or transitional government, and we should start where the peace was left off. We should restart the peace process. No. And this mechanism can do that. And then we go toward a new constitution. A new constitution needs to be drafted. The aspirations of the people of Afghanistan has to be, included in that constitution and monitored by the international community. And out of that constitution, we need to have an electoral representative system where people are going to be able to vote. One vote, one person, one vote, not submission or bay'at as we call it. So this is what we are asking the international community, especially the United Nations, to at least create a space where the Taliban will be judged by their deeds. And also, I think, at the same time, continue to support the representations, legitimate representations of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan abroad.
Thank you. And in order to conclude, Mr. Ambassador, how do you see the future of Afghanistan?
Again, there are two scenarios. There is a scenario where the Taliban will change, and there's also a scenario the Taliban will not change. I strongly believe the Taliban will change if we exert pressure on the Taliban. They talk about engagement. We have to get engaged with the Taliban. We have to engage the Taliban based on our own term, not their term, number one. And number two, we have to employ those soft power means and also hard power. And though I think that is the only way that we can make the Taliban realize that they are a factor in Afghan politics, not the factor in Afghan politics.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Zekriya from the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, allow me to thank you once again for accepting our invitation and for your kind invitation to the embassy. Thank you
very
so much.
Thank you for coming.
ممنونم جناب سفیر.
All right.